What up, perps? K-Copious back in effect. Purple State Party. You know what we're doing here? Repping America, the center, and common sense. So this week we're taking on the letter E, mainly for energy at this moment. I'm kind of low on it, had a long week. But last week, man, I feel like I hit my stride. So hopefully we can keep that momentum going. Appreciate you being here. Love you all, and let's get on with it. All right, so on Wednesday, there was a hearing in the House of Representatives called the Anti-American Airways, holding the head of NPR and PBS accountable. I found it kind of funny when Representative Garcia from California asked the head of PBS, the American people want to know is Elmo now, or has he ever been a member of the Communist Party of the United States? A yes or a no? Kind of hearkening back to the McCarthy hearings there. I mean, look, even Bill Maher favors cutting public broadcasting funding. The problem with them is that they've gone way too far to the left. Well, I should say NPR has. PBS, I haven't really made my mind up. You know, Americans trust PBS News. It's one of the most trusted news organizations out there. I've not personally seen anything that's extremely biased. I live here in California. So obviously, locally, my PBS might be a little bit more, liberal leaning than across the country. But NPR, oh my goodness, we know they are. The Hill here is writing about this. Many of us have written for years about the biased reporting at NPR. Not all of this criticism was made out of hostility towards the outlet. Many honestly want NPR to reverse course and adopt more balanced coverage. That is why when NPR was searching for a new CEO, I, the writer, encouraged the board to hire a moderate figure without a history of political advocacy or controversy. But they hired Catherine Meyer, who, despite all of her claims to the opposite, has tweeted and gone on record as saying a lot of the things that the representatives were calling her out about. When she was asked about the First Amendment, she said she supports it, but yet she had once tweeted that the First Amendment is the number one challenge that makes it tricky to censor or modify content as she would like. She's supported deplatforming anyone she deems to be fascist, and even suggested that she might support punching Nazis. And, she was asked about the truth. And she said, the truth is very important to us here at NPR. But yet she once declared our reverence for the truth might be a distraction in getting things done. See, a lot of her statements and answers and then the contradiction that followed hinges on the fact that they have a message. And that's the problem that people, unless you're far on the left, that's the problem people have with it, is that they have a mission, and their mission is Democrats. As expected, this is continuing on with the Hill article, as expected, the bias at NPR only got worse. The leadership even changed a longstanding rule barring journalists from joining political protesters. One of the editors, Early Berlin, had watched NPR become an echo chamber for the far left, with a virtual purging of all conservatives and Republicans from the newsroom. He noted that the Washington headquarters had 87 registered Democrats among its editors and 0 Republicans. When she was asked about this by one of the representatives, Mayer said, "Oh yeah, we're fair." And then they pointed out this fact, that there aren't any registered Republicans working at NPR. And obviously that's a problem when you chase people out, so you can control the narrative. That's not really something that the American taxpayer should be paying for. We should not be paying for propaganda, When asked about her past public statements that Trump is a deranged racist psychopath, she said she would not post such views today. She similarly brushed off her statements that America is addicted to white supremacy and denounced the use of the words boys and girls as erasing language for non-binary people. When she was asked about the past assertion that U.S. was founded on black plunder and white democracy, she said she no longer believed what she had said. She also wrote that America is addicted to white supremacy. She was asked about reparations, and she said no, and they said, that she doesn't support reparations, but yet she was quoted as saying that she read the book, A Case for Reparations. She then went on to deny that she ever read that book, even though she had a post where she said, spent the day reading the book. She believes this stuff. She believes in reparations. And then she was asked, have you paid any reparations? And she said no. What she really meant was non-fiscal reparations. But that's what she believes. And therein lies the problem, that when you are judging current America by its past, it's not going to end well. Your opinion is going to be severely tainted. Remember, the left is the side that would call black people the blackface of white supremacy. They don't understand that just because they have that thought, it doesn't mean that that thought's right. That's part of the problem we see with a lot of these elitist leftists. They don't understand that they're just wrong. The one moment of clarity came when Mara was asked about NPR's refusal to cover the Hunter Biden laptop. When first disclosed with evidence of millions in alleged influence peddling by the Biden family, NPR's then managing editor, Terrence Samuels, made a strident and even mocking statement. We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. It was a story. The FBI came in possession of incriminating evidence of selling influence. They verified the laptop, and then everybody sat there and said, "Oh no, it's Russian. It's a Russian plot." I can't think of the word right now. And NPR ran with that story just as much as all of the other media outlets. But the difference between like a CNN and an NPR is CNN is funded by CNN. Now I understand, of course, the retort to this is, well, NPR doesn't get all of their funding from the federal government. Well, they shouldn't get any. I mean, we need people who report on these things. The truth of the matter is, without beating the dead horse that is the laptop, that story could have changed the last election. That story could have altered the last 4 years. Imagine if DOGE is successful in purging the government waste, the government corruption, the redundancies and things like that. Imagine if we had been able to do that 4 years ago. Where would we be right now? And one of the reasons is because people were driven by the media to hate Trump and to overlook the fact that Biden was worse. He simply was worse, and he wasn't up for the job, and he became a puppet. Going back to the the Hill article on NPR, Meyer wants to know now that the NPR acknowledges that we were mistaken in failing to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story more aggressively and sooner. All this took, as the author says, was the threat of a complete cutoff of federal funding. In the end, NPR's bias and contempt for the public over the years is well documented. But this should not be the reason for cutting off such funding. Rather, the cutoff should be based on the principle that democracies do not selectively subsidize media outlets. We have long rejected the model of state media, and it's time we reaffirm that principle. It's true. I mean, PBS, I think, is a little bit different because PBS provides educational and alternative programming that might not be quite as viable on network television. I watch a lot of PBS. I subscribe to the Passport. I can watch the mysteries. I can watch the shows. But I have noticed lately that there is a proliferation of sort of left-wing stories. But I don't really mind that because a lot of those stories are just trying to put a face to the people. And in some cases, that's perfectly just. I don't have a problem with it. But NPR, look, lots of people I know listen to NPR, and they think it's fair and balanced. And that's the problem. A lot of us old schoolers, we come from a day where there was a lot less bias. There wasn't such open bias. Sometimes it was just a matter of which stories they covered and didn't cover, but they weren't really significant. A lot of times it was stuff relating to guns. They talked about guns being used badly, but not guns being used in a good way. But, that kind of slant or bias, you could see through pretty easily. So the Hill goes on to say here, many defenders of NPR would be apoplectic. You don't come to me for pronunciations. Hopefully not. I know how to say this word. Whatever. Many defenders of NPR would get pissed off if the government were to fund such competitors as Fox News. Indeed, Democrat members previously sought to pressure cable carriers to drop Fox, the most popular cable news channel. And of course, the author says, for full disclosure, they are Fox News legal analysts. Ironically, Fox News is more diverse than NPR and has more Democrat viewers than CNN and MSNBC, because it's not all slant. All right, there's a big difference between trying to sell the overall philosophy of the far left versus trying to mitigate the damage being done to the Trump administration by Trump or one of his members. We'll get into that a little more later. Berliner revealed, he was the editor who left, revealed that according to NPR's demographic research, only 6% of his audience is black, only 7% Hispanic. According to Berliner, only 11% of NPR listeners describe themselves as very or somewhat conservative. He further stated that based on these numbers, NPR's audience is liberal white Democrats in coastal cities and college towns. That's what it is. It is an echo chamber. I think PBS has a much more broader viewership and I guess listenership to some degree. But yeah, even if they get any federal tax dollars, it's subsidizing propaganda. Let's put it this way. When there is a problem with our government, if all of us can see it, then we can affect a change. But when only half of the country is being allowed to see the problem, then things don't get done. That's what keeps us divided. When I read articles from both sides of the fence and then draw a conclusion based on the two different articles, I've seen a better view. I've seen what the story really is about, right? The same for anybody out there. But if you're only listening in an echo chamber, you're never going to hear any counterpoints to that argument. You're just going to believe it. All right, well, that's enough of that. All right, so I know most people aren't into the UFC or the MMA, but Cain Velasquez was a champion of that. And he's been recently sentenced to 5 years in prison after pleading no contest to attempted murder. It stems from a time where he found out that his 4-year-old had been molested at school, and he took off in his truck at high speeds chasing the molester, or I don't know. It's in court right now, but the accused, whatever, and fired a few shots from his gun at the car as it fled. It hit the man's stepfather in the arm. I understand why he's going to jail. But, when it comes to kids, some of us dads, we're willing to pay the price. And I think Cain was willing to pay the price in this case. It seems like it's pretty much an open shut case. But what's really, really stuck out about this took place up in San Jose. The prosecutors were trying to get 30 years to life. And these are the same prosecutors, the same, political climate that was trying to get less time for people who randomly were shooting at each other in cars and hit an innocent child, murdered a baby in the back seat. These are the people who wanted the catch and release. But when it comes to a father defending his, I guess the honor of his child, they want to go all hardcore on it. I'm not excusing what Cain Velasquez did, but I know how I would react, and I would react similarly. I would want swift and mighty vengeance on the perpetrator. But again, you got to be willing to pay the price. And, I just thought it was worth mentioning that, sometimes these liberal prosecutors, and I'm assuming that's what it is. I mean, it's San Jose. I don't know what else to make of it. They cut corners to help out street criminals and gang members and drug dealers and things like that. But then in a high-profile case like this, they want to seek 30 years to life for something that is actually excusable, unlike the other criminals out there that they work so hard to get free. I don't know. California, is so full of bullshit that it's really hard to not see it. Even Bill Maher grilled Gavin Newsom over California's regulation, telling him to doge the shit out of the bureaucracy. The HBO host previously warned Democrats they'd become the Whigs. The Whigs, if you don't know, which most people don't, I didn't. I had to look it up. I'm not going to pretend to be smart. They were a political party around the 1850s, 1830s, and they disbanded because they started to lose touch. Often, one of the things was over slavery, and sort of they kind of wanted to hold America back in its territorial expansion, and that was not really a popular sentiment at the time, and so they ended up going away. Enough about that. But here's the Bill Maher quote. The liberal comedian went on to list the people involved in California's bureaucracy. See, Bill Maher had to fix his roof after the Palisades fire, and Gavin had said that he was going to remove some of the bureaucracy. But Bill Maher ended up having to get a house inspection that was pretty incomplete, because when he had a second house, he passed the first inspection. He said the guy just pulled up out front of the house, looked at the roof, signed off on it. The next guy came in and cited him because he didn't have the right amount of vents. So it's kind of like you're paying for an inspection that's not real. You see, that's what pissed him off. And he went on to say, the people involved in the California bureaucracy, regulators, administrators, inspectors, contract reviewers, project managers, fee assessors, special commissioners, zoning officers, consultants, contractors, lawyers, lobbyists, and sometimes the union. Maher went on to say, can't you take a chainsaw? Can't we doge the shit out of these people? That's exactly why California is in the mess it's in. Lobbyists. Lobbyists put up the roadblocks, and then there are department after department that can get a chunk of change by playing in to some of these roadblocks. That's why every time we try to build low-cost housing here, all of this bureaucracy takes over, and before you know it, you can't afford to sell something at a lower price. You can't afford to rent to lower income people. You have to make back your money somehow. You've got this massive construction loan breathing down your neck. Now you've finished your project. Now you flip it over into a standard mortgage. Now you got this giant mortgage on your back, right? Interest is going to kill you, so you got to start paying off that building. But when you got to pay out of the pocket for all of these people, but once again, it shows you how they'll come out and they'll make a statement like, we're going to remove the red tape to help people rebuild. But the red tape's still there. Because at the end of the day, they just expect the rich to pay it, to shut up and pay it. That's one of the reasons why Democrats try to tax things the way they do. They don't want as many people being taxed, because that means those people will vote based on their taxes. Maybe that doesn't make much sense. But if you're not paying taxes, you don't care where your tax money is going, because it's not yours. If you don't pay taxes, you don't care about them raising taxes. But here in California, to get around raising taxes, what they do is they impose fees. They make their money that way. And that's the kind of bureaucracy that's really hard to ignore. That's why I don't understand the opposition to DOGE. But speaking of that tax thing, I came across this one. Norway's recent wealth tax increase was expected to generate $146 million annually. Instead, individuals worth $54 billion left the country, resulting in a loss of $594 million in tax revenue. That's a very liberal way of going about it. Trying to go after the rich because there's not enough rich people to vote them out of office, right? I mean, when you're talking about 1%, right, the 1% that owns everything, what does that leave? 99%. So if you go after the 1%, is the 99% going to back the 1%? That's the plan. And this is how it backfires. We saw it here in California for the first time ever. We've had negative growth. I don't know how you can have negative growth. That's, I think, what they call an oxymoron. Great band, Oxymorons. Look them up. But anyhow, it's the stupid shit that they do. So one of the stories that got pushed a lot this week was this whole thing about Signalgate. Signalgate is a secured messaging app, and Hetzek and some of his boys over there, DOD, whatever, were on a group chat, kind of calling out the plays as they happen in this strike in the Yemen. Letting each other know, like, oh, the bombers are up, the bombs have been dropped, the target's been hit, blah 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 blah. And apparently there was a journalist that had been included in this group. Now, I'm not making excuses for that. That was kind of dumbass. But that's the kind of dumbass stuff that we see now with the internet, instant messaging the wrong person, emailing the wrong person. I think it's stupid, but for the Democrats or the people on the left to get so worked up about it, it's funny because, under Biden, we had, I think it was Lloyd, one of our top commanders, went basically missing for a week while he had some sort of procedure at a hospital. They couldn't reach Biden to talk over the plan for the Afghan withdrawal, so they just start pulling the troops and people out. And we know what happened. 13 people lost their lives because things weren't done right, and we left billions of dollars of equipment behind. This didn't really cost us anything. Everything involved with this was successful. All the targets were struck. There were no casualties on our side. It's a stupid thing, but you see how the media tried to run with it because they're trying desperately to make Trump look bad because they know that that's the only hope they have. And they saw that evaporate in the last election where people were like, yeah, Trump might be a dick, but he's a hell of a lot better than Kamala. And, they really only have that one tactic. So the Democrat and their media allies want us to think that DOGE is trying to get Social Security, but in reality, they're trying to get more people more money. Like they said, Trump told DOGE, use a scalpel, not a hatchet. And they're going about it in a very surgical way. They're looking at some of the ways that people are defrauding the system. That's one of the big things. We're going to get into more specifics as it pertains to that in relation to, oh my God, what a word salad that was. Anyhow, let's just keep this going before we get derailed. The Democrats also say, oh, they're cutting off medical research. Well, there are like 20-something departments in our federal health department. And if one makes a discovery that might be useless to them but useful somewhere else, it's not always relayed back and forth because the computers don't talk to each other. That's the kind of inefficiency that our government is operating on right now. It's ridiculous. Here's another great example. One of the things they want to change is right now, if money goes to a university for research grants, the university can spend 40% of that money elsewhere. So not on the research. It's for the university to spend. DOGE wants to lower that to 15%. So in reality, it sounds like they're bolstering research because they're putting more money into the pockets of the actual researchers. We were talking about the Social Security. They found that 40% of phone calls to change deposits, in other words, where your check goes, are fraudulent. One software engineer went in there and he was like, what the hell's going on here? These computers are like 50 years old. There are still departments using typewriters for things. Inefficiency costs money. If the Democrats want Social Security protected and they want money for all of their progressive programs, right? They would help DOGE find all the waste, but they can't simply because it's the wrong tribe. And that, again, is why things like NPR being biased matter. Because when you divide the country to these two tribes, then you can allow politicians to try to manipulate the system for their own gain. And that's one of the things that they do with these government programs. They take a lot of money and siphon it off to other people, and in return they get campaign donations. And both sides do it. But right now our country is, that's one of the reasons why people support defunding NPR right now. We're broke. We're going broke. Look at it this way. If you max out a credit card and you pay it back with another credit card, then you max both of those out. So now you borrow money against your car, but then you go back and you remax out your credit cards. Now you borrow on your house, then you remax all your credit cards again. Where's the end of that? At some point, you're going to run out of money. At some point, you're going to have to file for bankruptcy. And that's where our government is right now. If you want all of these social programs like the Democrats say they do, then we need money. And we're not going to do money by raising taxes. I mean, before you raise my taxes at all, I want to see you account for the money that you've spent. It's ridiculous, the amount of money that they're just wasted. Billions are being lost to scams, no accountability, fraud, all of that. DOGE is really, what they're really trying to do, despite the headlines, is trying to apply public business practices to the government. You know, the software engineer I was talking about, he was horrified to see these inefficient computers. I mean, can you imagine trying to live your life right now on an old flip phone or an old like Windows 95 computer or a DOS computer, an MS-DOS computer? I mean, they were great for the day, man. They really were. They got us to where we are now, but you couldn't live your life on one of those old computers. They couldn't handle streaming Netflix. They couldn't handle the gaming that we put through, the spreadsheets that we open, the amount of memory that's used in graphics programs. Think about graphics cards nowadays. How much what they power. And you couldn't power those off old computers. And that's what we're running in the government? Come on. I mean, both sides of the fence should be on board with this. Let's chop back some money and spend it wisely on government infrastructure. Because if all of this money is just being wasted because of inefficiency, that could be changed. The business executives on DOGE were troubled by the redundancies and unaccountable actions. And one of them that they brought up was the Navy requested money for new submarines. They got the money, but they never built the submarines. Then they were asked, where's the money? They were like, we don't know. And the other people were like, okay, that's cool. I mean, there is one bank account for the United States. Believe it or not, there's one primary bank account. And you put in a request, they cut the check. There's no verification. There's no checks or balances. It's super easy to defraud our government. I think in Social Security alone, it was something like $50 billion in fraud. You could just call up and convince an agent that you're the person and change the direct deposit information. It's that easy. But yet, over at the IRS, they have like 1,400 employees. Not looking for fraud. No, they're the procurement department, giving phones and laptops. Like, 1,400? That is just inefficient waste that needs to be cut back. That's efficiency. That's an E. Let's talk about education really quick. My dad was an educator. So was my mom. Both of them taught. My dad taught in middle school. And he was the kind of teacher that sort of grabbed the guy by the collar, shook him a little bit and said, hey, look, you got the bad path and you got a good path. And he tried to help out. He had season tickets to the Lakers, Dodgers, things like that. And he would use those tickets to help his students. He actually would give them rides. At his funeral services, half the people there were former students. Other former students sent in letters to be read because my dad had shook them and got them on a path to where now they are rich and successful. And he was the one that was instrumental. But he retired early because of the new way of teaching. Just like we have activist journalists, we have activist teachers. And then we have all of these rules that were put in place by the legal eagles, you know, that made teaching more about just meeting the metrics. Schools have changed. They have. Discipline has been completely lost. They don't even punish you for truancies. Scores are perverted to make quotas. That's what they do. If you want more students to graduate, then just lower the standards. We now have college professors who routinely indoctrinate the youth into their far left way of thinking. The teachers union uses its power to keep school choice out of reach. There are various things out there that could be used to educate our children, online schools, charter schools, things like that, outside of the public sector. But, you know, like public schools, the Department of Education has also failed. Their push for diversity above all else has ended honor programs and encouraged bad students. You know, part of the scam is The students get passed on to college because lots of jobs require diplomas. The student racks up that college debt, fails college, and now is crushed by debt and doesn't have an opportunity to enroll in maybe a trade school or some alternative form of higher education. I'm all for it. I understand that you have to have some sort of accountability, right? Like for certain jobs. Hold on, I'm going right here. I got myself a little out of order. If I were Trump and DOGE right now, I would look at what kind of legal language can outlaw the practice of requiring diplomas for your basic entry-level type of work. Because to some degree, I look at it like discrimination. If the job does not require higher training, okay? Like a forklift driver has to have a forklifter's driver license. If you want to drive a truck, you have to have, I think it's a Class C license, right? I get that. But a lot of people are missing out on jobs simply because they didn't go to college. And I just think that's ridiculous. But the Department of Education is under fire right now. And, a brief history was under Jimmy Carter, the teachers union went to Jimmy and said, hey, we want this Department of Education. They wanted a foothold into the federal government through the Department of Education. And Jimmy Carter, against all better judgment, and he even said so, he said it was a bad idea, but he went with it because the teachers union is powerful and they they flexed their muscles on him. But ever since then, it's just gone downhill. I mean, a great example of that is the U.S. Department of Education revokes waivers for California and Oregon colleges. What this was all about was colleges in California and Oregon were taking money meant for the Partnership Pilots for Disconnected Youth program that was supposed to, help disconnected youth. The Department of Education allowed waivers under Biden to allow them to divert that money, which was meant for low-income students, first-generation college students, individuals with disability, to be used on illegal immigrants. And not just illegal immigrants to go to school. Whatever they wanted to do, they allowed them to divert funds. If you're going to have a federal Department of Education, shouldn't you see better results? But there hasn't been. Test scores have fallen. Students have been getting less and less educated ever since the Department of Education came into being. It's not serving its purpose. It's serving the unions. So recently my daughter turned 20. Time flies, man. It's amazing. Had a good birthday. Went to a concert. She wanted to get dinner, of course, at Denny's, because she's kind of basic that way. I'm not saying basic like a bad basic. I'm just saying basic as an adjective. But I was wondering, what it was going to be like, because I knew I was going to order eggs, I like my eggs, over easy, and then I dip my toast in it. That's something my grandparents used to do, and I kind of do that just to keep their memory alive. But I knew I was getting eggs, right? And as soon as I walk in, there's a sign saying that there's a surcharge on eggs. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of what I thought I was going to see. And sure enough, there's a sticker right on the menu. There's a 50-cent surcharge for any orders with eggs. And I just kind of laugh because, there is an egg crisis right now. Of all the things to be running out of eggs, it's odd. But it reminded me of the time back in history. Some people listening might be old enough to remember this, when everybody was urgently warning us to not eat eggs because they were high in cholesterol. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, whoops, we didn't know there was good cholesterol. And that's what I think is going on with the environment. I've been around to hear all of these different predictions: running out of oil, our farmland turning into a desert, the Hudson River was going to freeze over and no ships would be able to get into New York Harbor because of global cooling. And now they've changed it to, of course, climate change, because obviously our climate is changing somewhat. Something has changed in the rotation of the orbit of our planet, the moon, Mars, Venus. We don't know. Everything affects our planet. All the stuff that's going on out there in space affects our planet. So, you know, of course it's changing. I'm not going to deny that we're not having some weird ass shit lately. But even Greta Thunberg, remember her, that screechy little girl? She switched from the environment to supporting Palestine. And oddly enough, it seems Hamas, you know, because she's wearing their outfit, the little scarf and all of that, and she's screeching about occupation. And I know she's led by her parents, but, you know, Israel has not been in Gaza since Greta was born. But it's the cause du jour for them. That's the part that really sickens me. They fly around on private planes. They insist that America has to make all of these fundamental changes for the environment when the rest of the world is just ignoring it. And when that starts to run its course, they go, well, what's the next thing that the kids care about? And they're like, all right, Palestine. It's ridiculous. Speaking of the environment, you got to talk about EVs. And I'm reading articles now that with the extensive mining that goes into batteries and cars, EVs are a push environmentally. They were, like I've said before, they were designed for rich people to avoid gas stations, pure and simple. It was a new way of doing cars that had, you know, rapid acceleration, that were mostly computer controlled, maybe even self-driving. That was the appeal. It was never designed to save the environment because it takes just as much out of the environment to make one of those things. And you can fact check that, look it up. I looked into it just to make sure I wasn't off base. And it is. With what has to be taken out of the earth and the processes used to make, recycle, trash these things, it doesn't make any sense. I know of several people now who have had to get rid of their cars because the repair costs were too much, or their car had fender damage, just a normal accident that a gas car would shrug off, and the car had to be totaled because they're afraid that the inverter or the battery may have been damaged microscopically and could lead to a failure, which would put the insurance company on the hook. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. You know, when you look at like some of these energy sources like solar, here in California, we've had 5 fires in 4 years at one battery storage facility. Just one. Imagine if more of those populated the country, how many more fires we would have. We've had windmills that started spewing their blades into the ocean, and there were sharp metal fragments floating around off the eastern coast. There was a woman who died because her EV was in an accident, and the battery was producing such heat that rescuers couldn't come and save her. They couldn't pull her out of the vehicle because the flames were just too intense. That's one accident, I get it. But has there been any oil spills? Have there been any nuclear accidents? I mean, we have dozens of EVs catching on fire every time there's bad weather. We have them lighting up in parking lots, garages, in front of people's houses. EV bikes, those little battery-operated scooters that everybody's riding around on, they became the leading cause of death by fire in New York because the technology is fragile. The technology is not ready for mass consumption. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it. Sometimes it's just a bad idea. And that's where we are at with them right now. You know, that's the simple truth. And then the funny part about the whole EV thing, now, because the Democrats have once again whipped people into a needless frenzy over Elon Musk and DOGE, Teslas are being set on fire, which again does not help the environment. I'm pretty sure lighting a car on fire is not good for the overall environment. It's certainly not good for the environment in that area. But that's the kind of madness that happens when news agencies such as NPR are allowed to just be an echo chamber, to amplify one point of view without ever discussing the truth. If Israel was occupying Gaza, it would be a different story. If EVs were better for the environment, it would be a different story. If Hunter Biden's laptop had been covered properly, it would have been a different story. Kamala Harris would be president if they ever covered Joe Biden's health the way that they're supposed to do. That's the important part of our democracy is that we have this watchdog agency, and it's called journalism. But if all the journalists are just going to write propaganda, if the major networks are only going to promote propaganda, then people aren't going to see what's really going on. By default, they're making us dumber. They're making us more divided. That's what Purple State seeks to end, this damn divide. We can unite in purple. We can set aside the bad shit from either party. We can realize that the world is not black and white. It's gray. Politically, we need to be purple, and we need to look at the gray topics out there. We can't see things as just good or bad. That's, a very simple philosophy. It was from an old TV show, Facts of Life. You take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. I'm Kid Copious. I'm Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding. Don't believe the hype. And you know what? When that beat drops, dance it out.